The shocking royal decree. The day started like any other on Earth, with people going about their lives, unaware of the monumental event about to unfold. Captain Jake Carter, a no-nonsense military officer stationed in New York, sat in the break room sipping his coffee. He'd seen his fair share of strange things during his service, but nothing could have prepared him for what was coming. Suddenly, every screen in the world flickered. The usual programs and broadcasts were replaced with the image of a massive alien throne room. The figure seated on the throne was imposing, a tall alien with shimmering golden skin, dressed in elaborate robes that seemed to glow. His crown sparkled like a star, and his piercing blue eyes scanned the audience as if he could see through the screens. "I am King Saran of Salner," the alien began, his deep voice echoing through every corner of Earth. "Today, I come to you with an important decree that will shape the future of both our worlds." The room fell silent. Jake's coffee cup froze midair, and he frowned, his soldier instincts kicking in. What could this alien king possibly want? King Saran continued, his tone grave yet authoritative. "Our planet, Salner, faces a crisis. For centuries, our people have thrived, but now, our survival depends on forging a stronger bond with humanity. To ensure peace and prosperity, I hereby decree that my 3 daughters, the princesses of Salner, must each wed a human." The declaration stunned the world. Gasps and murmurs filled every room on Earth as people struggled to process what they had just heard. Jake's eyebrows shot up, and he muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." The king's voice grew more serious. "This is not a request. It is a necessity. To show our commitment, we have selected a group of humans to represent your kind. These individuals will travel to Salner and participate in a sacred process to determine their worthiness. The fate of this alliance depends on their success." Jake leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. Something about the way the king spoke made him uneasy. The decree felt less like an invitation and more like an ultimatum. He could almost sense the tension behind the king's words, as if there was more to this announcement than he was letting on. "Selected individuals will be notified shortly," the king said, his expression softening slightly. "We hope you will embrace this opportunity for unity and peace. Together, we can overcome any challenge. Long live Salner, and may our bond strengthen the universe." With that, the broadcast ended as abruptly as it had begun. The room fell into stunned silence. Jake looked around at his fellow soldiers, who were as bewildered as he was. "Did that just happen?" someone finally asked, breaking the silence. Jake shrugged, still processing the surreal announcement. "Looks like it." Before he could dwell on it further, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw a strange message. "Captain Jake Carter, you have been chosen to represent Earth. Prepare to depart for Salner in 24 hours. Instructions to follow." Jake's heart sank. Of all the people on Earth, why him? He wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, but marrying an alien princess, that was a bit much, even for him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about this sacred process wasn't right. The rest of the day passed in a blur. News channels buzzed with reactions to the decree. Experts debated the implications, while conspiracy theorists spun wild theories. Was the king's decree truly about peace, or was there another agenda at play? The uncertainty only fueled Jake's unease. As night fell, Jake sat alone in his quarters, staring at the stars outside his window. He had always been a man of action, someone who faced danger head-on. But this was different. He wasn't just going to another country. He was heading to an alien planet to fulfill a decree he didn't fully understand. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His commanding officer, General Harper, stepped in, his expression grim. "Jake, I know this is a lot to take in, but you've been chosen for a reason. You're one of our best, and we need you to represent humanity." Jake nodded, though his mind was racing. "Do we know why they're doing this? What's really going on up there?" Harper sighed. "We don't have all the answers, but one thing's clear. This isn't just about marriage. There's more at stake here than they're letting on. Be careful out there." The words lingered in Jake's mind as he prepared for his departure. He packed his gear, knowing that whatever awaited him on Solner would change his life forever. The thought of meeting the alien princesses, let alone competing for their favor, felt surreal. Yet beneath his skepticism, a spark of curiosity flickered. What kind of world was Skalmer? Who were these princesses? And what secrets was the king hiding? As the clock struck midnight, a bright beam of light appeared outside his window. A sleek, metallic ship hovered silently, waiting to take him to a world he had only seen in his wildest dreams. Jake took a deep breath, grabbed his bag, and stepped into the unknown. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey filled with danger, mystery, and choices that would determine the fate of two worlds. Welcome to Solner. Captain Jake Carter stood on the landing platform of the alien spaceship, his heart pounding as the vessel broke through Solner's shimmering atmosphere. The planet below was unlike anything he had ever imagined. Vast oceans glowed with a faint golden hue, while crystalline cities floated in the air, connected by shimmering bridges of light. It was breathtaking, yet something about it felt unnatural, almost too perfect. As the ship descended, Jake noticed the landing zone, a grand courtyard made of polished white stone that sparkled under the twin suns. Towering spires stretched into the sky, each one adorned with alien symbols that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. Hundreds of Salmorian citizens, their golden skin and elegant robes glimmering, stood in perfect lines, awaiting his arrival. Jake's military training kept him calm, but the surreal welcome made his stomach churn. Was he stepping into diplomacy or a trap? The ship's ramp extended with a hiss, and Jake took a deep breath, adjusting the ceremonial sash he'd been handed back on Earth. As he stepped onto the platform, a booming voice echoed across the courtyard. "Welcome, Captain Jake Carter of Earth. You stand before the royal family of Solner." The voice belonged to a tall alien clad in dark armor. His stern gaze scanned Jake with an intensity that made him feel like prey. Behind the armored figure stood the royal family, King Tyran, and his 3 daughters. The king looked even more imposing in person. His golden robes seemed to radiate authority, and his crown sparkled like a fragment of a star. But Jake's attention was quickly drawn to the princesses. Each of them was strikingly unique, their beauty otherworldly yet distinct. The eldest, Princess Zora, stood tall with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her piercing green eyes scanned Jake, like a hunter sizing up her prey. She wore armor that gleamed like polished obsidian, and a massive blade rested on her hip. Jake could tell she wasn't one for small talk. The middle sister, Princess Lyra, had a quieter presence. Her silver hair flowed like liquid moonlight, and her soft violet eyes held a sharp intellect. She wore a gown made of shimmering fabric that seemed to shift colors as she moved. She offered Jake a polite nod, but her expression betrayed curiosity, as if she were studying him. The youngest, Princess Aria, stood out the most. Her golden hair was braided with tiny glowing flowers, and her mischievous smile suggested she was up to something. She waved enthusiastically at Jake, earning a disapproving glare from Zora. King Siren stepped forward, his deep voice breaking the silence. "Captain Jake Carter, you honor us with your presence. This is the beginning of a sacred journey, one that will unite our worlds. You will spend time with my daughters, and through a series of trials, you will prove your worthiness. This is no ordinary competition. Your actions will determine the future of our alliance." Jake bowed slightly, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just walked into a high-stakes game without knowing the rules. "Thank you for the warm welcome, Your Majesty. I'll do my best to represent Earth." The king nodded, his expression unreadable. "You will have time to familiarize yourself with our customs. My daughters will guide you. Each of them possesses unique strengths, and it is your task to understand their ways. The trials begin tomorrow. Until then, rest." Before Jake could respond, The king turned and walked away, his robes flowing behind him. Zara and Lyra followed, but Arya lingered, grinning at Jake. "You look nervous," she said in a playful tone. "Don't worry, the first trial isn't that dangerous." "Probably." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous? What exactly am I getting into?" Arya winked. "Oh, you'll see. Just try not to embarrass yourself too much. Good luck, Captain." With that, she skipped after her sisters, leaving Jake standing alone in the middle of the grand courtyard. Later that evening, Jake was escorted to his quarters, a lavish room with walls that seemed to hum faintly, as if alive. He couldn't sleep. The weight of the king's words and the princess's piercing gazes played on his mind. What were these trials? Why did the king insist on this bizarre marriage decree? And why did he feel like every step he took on this planet was being watched? Jake got up and wandered to the window. The view of Solnar's glowing cities and twin moons was mesmerizing, but his gut told him something was off. This wasn't just about marriage or alliances. There was something the king wasn't telling him, and if he was going to survive this, he needed to figure it out fast. Tomorrow, the trials would begin, and with them, the true nature of Solnar's plan. Jake tightened his fists. Whatever lay ahead, he wasn't going to let Earth, or himself, be used as a pawn. The trials begin. The first light of Solnar's twin suns filtered through Jake's window, casting soft shadows across the alien landscape outside. He hadn't slept a wink. His mind raced with questions, each one feeding into his growing anxiety. Today was the beginning of the trials, and he had no idea what to expect. What did it mean to prove his worth? What were the princesses really thinking? And, more importantly, what was King Saran hiding? When the summons came, Jake was ready. He put on the ceremonial attire the royal family had provided, a strange mix of Earth military precision and Solnorian elegance, and headed for the Grand Hall. He wasn't sure what to make of the whole situation, but one thing was clear: there was no turning back now. The royal court was gathered in full splendor when Jake entered. Princess Zara stood by the king's side, her posture rigid and proud. Lyra was quietly studying a holographic map, her fingers tracing the glowing surface as she seemed lost in thought. Arya, ever the playful one, was chatting with a group of young Solnorian nobles, her laughter echoing through the hall. "Ah, Captain Carter," King Saran's voice boomed, his presence commanding attention. "You're punctual. I admire that." Jake bowed, trying to mask his nervousness. "Your Majesty, I'm ready for whatever comes next." "Good. The first trial will test your mind and adaptability. Here on Solnar, we value intellect above all else. If you are to bond with my daughters, you must prove that you are not only capable in body, but in spirit and mind as well." Lyra looked up from her map, her violet eyes meeting Jake's. "The first challenge is a test of perception. You will navigate the mind labyrinth, an ancient maze created by our ancestors to test the mental fortitude of rulers and leaders. It will push you to your limits, Captain. Are you prepared for it?" Jake nodded, though doubt lingered in his chest. A maze? Was this some kind of puzzle, or something more sinister? Without another word, Zara gestured toward the far side of the hall. "Follow me," she commanded. Her voice was cold, but there was an edge of something else. Respect, perhaps, or a challenge Jake wasn't sure he was ready to face. Jake followed her through the palace, his steps echoing in the hollow corridors. They passed doors that shimmered with energy and halls lined with alien artifacts that seemed to hum with life. Finally, they arrived at an ornate doorway at the end of a long hallway. "This is the entrance," Zara said, her tone less formal now. She unlocked the door with a device that glowed in her hand, and the massive portal swung open with a low creak. Behind it was an eerie, shifting landscape, an ever-changing maze of glowing walls, shifting paths, and optical illusions. Jake hesitated for a moment, his instincts telling him to be cautious, but there was no turning back now. The maze awaited. "You will enter the maze alone," Zora explained. The rules are simple. Find the center, and you will pass the trial. Fail, and you will be removed from the challenge. Remember, this maze is not just about finding your way through. It's about overcoming illusions, bending your perception of reality. Trust your instincts, but don't trust everything you see. With a final, unreadable look, Zara stepped back, the door closing behind Jake with a quiet hiss. He was alone. For the first few minutes, Jake thought it was just a simple maze. The walls were lined with soft, glowing light, and the paths seemed straightforward. But as he continued deeper, the world around him began to distort. The walls seemed to twist and shift, and the floor beneath his feet became uneven, almost as if it were alive. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, whispers, distant footsteps, and the soft hum of something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. His first instinct was to turn back, but there was no way out. The path he had entered had already vanished, replaced by more twisting corridors. Jake tried to focus, remembering Zara's words. Trust your instincts, but don't trust everything you see. It didn't take long before the illusions began. The path in front of him split into two identical corridors. He couldn't tell which was the right one, which one was the real one. Jake paused. He reached for his communicator, only to find it gone. The maze had stripped him of anything that could give him an advantage. He was on his own. The first trap appeared. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead, cloaked in darkness. It looked like one of the Xalmorian guards, except its eyes glowed red, and it moved toward him with unnatural speed. It was a ghostly version of Zara, her face twisted into a cruel, mocking grin. "Do you think you can win this trial?" The figure taunted, its voice an eerie echo of Zara's. "You're nothing more than a human. Weak, out of place. You don't belong here." Jake's heart pounded, but he didn't falter. This was part of the illusion, part of the test. He didn't know how, but he could feel it. With a deep breath, he pushed forward, stepping right through the apparition, which melted away like mist. As he moved deeper into the maze, the illusions grew more complicated. He saw visions of Earth, his home, his team, and his military comrades, looking lost and terrified. One vision even showed his mother, crying out to him. But none of it was real. It was a battle of the mind, a war of perceptions. Jake learned quickly. The maze wasn't just about finding the path. It was about controlling what his mind wanted him to believe. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Jake arrived at the center of the labyrinth. His mind was exhausted, his body sore, but he had made it. And standing in the center was Princess Lyra, waiting for him with a slight, approving nod. "You passed," she said simply, her voice devoid of surprise. But this was only the beginning. Jake breathed heavily, wiping sweat from his brow. "What's next?" Lyra smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "The second trial will test your heart. Are you ready for it?" Jake didn't answer. He wasn't sure if he was ready for anything, but one thing was clear: this was far from over. Uneasy alliances. The air felt heavier now as Jake stepped into the grand hall once again, his body still recovering from the mental strain of the mind labyrinth. But the challenges weren't over. He could feel it. There was a new tension in the palace, one that wasn't there before. And it wasn't just the looming shadow of the trials. Something deeper, more unsettling, was at play. Lyra had led him back to his chambers after the maze trial, offering little more than a quiet nod. She hadn't spoken a word since, her expression unreadable. Yet there was something in her eyes, a flicker of concern, maybe, or perhaps uncertainty. Jake didn't know what to make of it, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. The trials were only going to get more difficult, and he was starting to realize that he needed to be more than just a participant. He needed to figure out what was really going on. That evening, a small gathering had been arranged in the royal dining hall. Jake was summoned to join the royal family and a handful of Xalmorian nobles for dinner. He'd grown accustomed to the royal palace's strange beauty, but tonight, the opulence felt suffocating. The marble walls reflected the glow of floating orbs, and the table was set with extravagant dishes that seemed to shift and change before his eyes. The royal family was already seated, and their eyes turned to Jake as he entered. The princesses sat in their usual positions, Zara at the head, a warrior queen in her own right, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Lyra, with her thoughtful, quiet demeanor, sitting closest to Jake, and Arya, still with that mischievous grin, her eyes twinkling like she was waiting for something to unfold. As Jake sat at the table, the air between them felt thick. He could sense that each of the princesses had their own motivations, their own agendas, and none of them seemed particularly interested in his well-being. "So, Captain," Zara began, her voice commanding and direct, "how does it feel to be the chosen one? Earth's representative, the one who will decide the fate of our worlds?" Jake met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "It's an honor, but let's not pretend it's as simple as that. There's something going on here, something bigger than just these trials." Lyra shot him a glance, one that seemed almost apologetic. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, her voice lacking the usual royal air she carried. "These trials are designed to test your worth, just as my father said." Jake leaned forward slightly, ignoring the delicate, shifting dishes before him. "It's not just the trials I'm worried about. It's the reason behind them. Why would your father send you three into a marriage arrangement with a human? What's really going on here, Lyra? I need to know." The room fell into a deep silence, the other nobles at the table exchanging uneasy glances. Lyra's eyes flickered, a hint of something, fear, crossing her face before she quickly masked it with her usual calm. "Jake, you're not the only one who has questions," Lyra finally said, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You're not the first Earthling to come here, and you won't be the last. But what you don't know is that the king, well, he has plans that go beyond the marriage decree. These trials, they're just a small part of it. The real goal is much darker." Jake's pulse quickened. His instincts had been right. There was something deeper, something they weren't telling him. "What do you mean? What's the king planning?" Before Lyra could respond, Zora's cold voice cut in from across the table. "Enough, Lyra. Don't confuse the human. He has no right to know our secrets." Lyra looked as though she wanted to argue, but she stayed silent, her fingers gently tapping the table. It was clear this wasn't the first time Zora had shut her down. But Arya, the youngest princess, leaned in with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know," Arya said, her tone playful but with an edge, "I think you're right, Captain. There is more going on here. But do you really want to know? It's not all what it seems. The king's plan, well, let's just say there's a reason he chose you. You're not just a pawn in this game. You're the one who gets to decide how it ends." Jake narrowed his eyes, sensing that Arya wasn't just making a joke. She was toying with him, trying to get him to ask questions without revealing too much. He needed to play this carefully. "And what if I don't want to play your game?" he shot back. Zara's eyes flickered, her hand tightening around her glass of wine. "Then you fail," she said coldly. "And both of our worlds suffer for it. Don't be foolish, Captain. You've been chosen for a reason, whether you like it or not." The tension in the room was palpable. Jake felt the weight of Zara's words, but more than that, he could feel the strain between the sisters. There was no unity here, only competition, secrets, and a battle for control. Lyra, who had been quiet for the last few minutes, leaned in again, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not the only one who's trapped, Jake. The king controls everything. We have no choice but to obey." Her words hit him hard, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was telling the truth. This wasn't just about marriage. This wasn't even just about the trials. There was something bigger, something dark, and Jake was standing right in the middle of it, unsure if he was playing the game or if it was playing him. As the meal continued, the conversation shifted, but Jake couldn't focus on the food. His mind was reeling with the fragments of truth he gathered. One thing was clear. The trials weren't just a test of strength. intelligence, or heart. They were a test of loyalty, and Jake was beginning to realize that his greatest challenge wasn't going to be defeating any trial. It would be figuring out who, if anyone, he could trust. And as the evening wore on, it became clear that no one at this table was quite what they seemed. Not even the princesses. The hidden conspiracy. The weight of the royal banquet still hung in the air as Jake stood alone in the dimly lit hallway of the palace. The conversation from dinner kept replaying in his mind. Lyra's cryptic warnings, Zora's cold threats, and Arya's taunting, playful smile that didn't quite mask the uncertainty beneath. Something was deeply wrong with this place, and it wasn't just the trials or the royal decree. There was a conspiracy, a secret being kept from him, and from everyone. Jake's instincts had served him well before, and they were screaming now. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The next day, instead of heading to the next trial, Jake made a bold decision. He would find out what the king was hiding. Lyra's words had been haunting him. The king controls everything. We have no choice but to obey. But why? What was it that made the king so powerful that even his own daughters seemed bound to his will? His opportunity came when, after a brief meeting with the king and his advisors, he was left alone in one of the palace corridors. The palace was vast, filled with ancient rooms and hidden passages, and Jake had learned over the last few days that not everything was as it seemed. He had noticed small details during his time here: flickering lights, odd whispers in the walls, guards watching from the shadows, and knew this wasn't just a simple royal palace. This was a place of hidden truths, buried beneath layers of luxury and power. He turned a corner and approached a guarded door he had seen before. It was heavily secured, more than any other door in the palace. The guards that stood outside never spoke, and always kept their eyes fixed ahead. But Jake had learned enough to know that their vigilance was more than just professional. They were guarding something. A sudden voice startled him. "Captain Carter, what are you doing here?" Jake spun around to see Princess Lyra, her face unreadable as she stepped from the shadows. She had followed him. Jake hesitated. His heart raced. Was this a trap? Was she leading him straight into a scheme of the king's? But the sincerity in her eyes stopped him. There was no pretense. She was just as trapped as he was. He could see it now, the quiet fear that lingered behind her royal composure. She wasn't here to deceive him. She was here to warn him. "You shouldn't be here," Lyra whispered urgently, glancing at the guards. "I came to stop you." Jake took a step closer, lowering his voice. "What is this place? What's behind that door?" Lyra hesitated. "You wouldn't understand. It's too dangerous. Even my father doesn't know. No, especially my father." She seemed to catch herself, realizing she had said too much. Jake pressed. "Lyra, what's really going on here? What aren't you telling me?" "The king. The trials. They don't make sense. None of this does." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of regret and fear. She glanced at the guards again, then back at Jake, before finally speaking in a low, almost inaudible voice. "The trials aren't what you think. It's not about proving your worth. It's about harvesting something that can save Zalnir, at a cost." Jake's stomach twisted. "What kind of harvesting? What do you mean, at a cost?" Lyra took a deep breath. "My father has made a deal with forces outside of our planet. The marriages, these trials, are a front. The real purpose is to gather the life force of Earth, of humanity itself, to fuel a ritual that will save Zalnir, but it will destroy your planet in the process." Jake took a step back, his mind racing. "What are you talking about? Why would the king destroy Earth? Why would he sacrifice an entire planet for his own?" "He's desperate," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Zalnir is dying. The planet's energy reserves are running out, and the only way to replenish them is to harvest life force, human life force. The ritual requires it. The marriages, the trials, they're all part of the process to gather the energy necessary. But no one except my father, knows how far he's willing to go. We're all being used. And I can't stop him." Jake's head spun. The king had planned this from the start, to use Earth and its people as a resource. The alien princesses, the trials, even the marriages, it was all part of a twisted scheme to harvest energy and save Zellner at Earth's expense. Jake looked at Lyra, seeing the pain in her eyes. She wasn't just caught in the king's web. She was desperate to break free. And now, so was he. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. "I had to," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "Because you're the only one who can stop it. My father's plan is almost complete. The final trial is a ritual, not a test. And you're the key to it all." The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He was the key. The king had chosen him for more than just the trials. He had been chosen as the vessel, the catalyst for the ritual that would drain Earth's life force. "No," Jake said, shaking his head. "I won't let this happen. There's got to be another way." Lyra's eyes were filled with sadness. "I don't know if there is, but you have to try. You have to stop my father before the ritual begins. If you don't, it will be too late for both our worlds." The weight of her words settled on Jake's shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his survival anymore. He was fighting to save Earth. The true test was just beginning. And this time, the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. As the door creaked open, revealing the shadowed corridors behind it, Jake made a silent vow to do whatever it took to stop the king's plan, even if it meant facing his worst fears. And he knew, deep down, that the biggest challenge was yet to come. The final trial. The tension in the royal palace was suffocating. Jake couldn't shake the weight of Lyra's revelations, the king's dark plot, the twisted nature of the trials, and the role he was meant to play in a ritual that would destroy Earth. Every step he took seemed like a step closer to a fate he couldn't escape. But as the final trial loomed on the horizon, there was no turning back. The pieces were already in motion. Jake had learned that nothing in the palace was as it seemed. The grand halls, the royal gatherings, even the trials themselves were part of a much larger, far more sinister scheme. The king, despite his outward calm, was preparing to enact a ritual that would drain humanity's life force. The marriage, just a cover for what would truly unfold. But Lyra had given him hope. She had warned him. And now Jake knew he had only one chance to stop it all, during the final trial. This wasn't going to be about proving himself worthy in some petty competition. This trial was the heart of the king's plan, and Jake was determined to expose it for what it truly was. The air in the palace hall was thick with anticipation as the royal family gathered for the final trial. The princesses were present, their eyes sharp as ever, though something had changed. The once indomitable confidence in Zora's gaze had softened, replaced by an unreadable expression. Lyra, on the other hand, seemed to carry a quiet inner storm, her eyes flickering with both resolve and worry. And Arya was quieter than Jake had ever seen her usual playful demeanor gone, replaced with a contemplative silence. The king sat at the head of the room, his face calm and impassive as always. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something else, a cold certainty, like a predator waiting to strike. He watched Jake intently, as if the final moments of this grand spectacle were unfolding exactly as he had planned. "You've made it this far, Captain." King Siran's voice rang out, deep and resonant. "You have proven your strength, your mind, and your heart. Now it's time for you to make your final choice." Jake stepped forward, his hands clenched at his sides. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. This was the moment that would either save Earth or destroy it. And yet, part of him couldn't shake the feeling that the king was already steps ahead of him, knowing exactly how this would unfold. The final trial, Siran continued, is not one of physical strength, nor is it a test of intellect. It is a trial of your very soul. You will choose which of my daughters you wish to marry. This is no simple decision. It is one that will seal the fate of both our worlds." Jake's stomach twisted. This was the ritual. It wasn't about love or loyalty. It was a sacrifice, a transaction disguised as a choice. The king wasn't asking him to pick a bride. He was asking Jake to choose the vessel through which the life force of Earth would be drawn. It didn't matter which princess he chose. The outcome would be the same. Jake glanced at Lyra, who met his gaze with a silent plea. Her eyes were full of sorrow, as if she had known this moment would come, but it didn't change the fact that she was still part of the system she was desperate to escape. Zara's eyes were sharp and calculating, but they also held a hint of unease, as though she had come to understand the depth of the king's intentions. And Arya was standing near the edge of the room, watching with a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity, a faint hope still flickering in her expression. "I will not choose," Jake said, his voice firm but steady. "I will not participate in this farce. You want me to marry one of your daughters, to help you drain Earth's life force. I refuse." The room fell into stunned silence. King Saran's face remained impassive, but the flicker of anger in his eyes was unmistakable. "You dare defy me?" The king's voice was cold, his tone like a blade. "You were chosen for this purpose. Your refusal is an insult not only to my family, but to both our worlds. You have no choice in this matter." Jake felt a rush of anger flood through him. "You're wrong. I have a choice. I will not be part of your plan, and I will not allow you to sacrifice Earth for your own gain." For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in the king's eyes, a flash of doubt, quickly hidden behind his mask of regal composure. But then, without warning, the air in the room shifted, growing thick with energy. Jake could feel it. The power in the room was growing, twisting, and warping, as though the very fabric of reality was being bent. And then, the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. The ritual had already begun. The king's eyes glowed a deep, unnatural blue. He raised his hand, and a surge of energy shot out from him, coiling around the room, tightening like a noose. Jake's heart raced. He could feel the energy, dark and corrupt, surging through the palace, pulling on him, drawing him into its grip. The king wasn't just asking for Jake's submission. He was forcing it. The ritual was no longer a choice. It was a trap. "Now, Captain," King Saran's voice echoed, "you will choose, or the consequences will be dire." Jake's vision blurred as the energy spiraled around him, its power growing stronger with each passing second. He could feel it. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of humanity. But in that moment, he realized something. The king had underestimated him. The trial wasn't just a test of his mind, body, or soul. It was a test of his will. And Jake wasn't going to break. With all his might, Jake reached out, breaking through the energy that sought to bind him. His body burned with the intensity of the power surrounding him, but he fought back with every ounce of strength he had left. "I choose none," he said, his voice ringing out through the palace. "I choose freedom. I choose Earth." As his words echoed, a surge of light erupted from within him, blasting through the king's energy field and breaking the ritual. The king recoiled, his face twisted in rage. The energy in the room faltered, and for a moment, the palace was silent. But Jake knew this wasn't over. He had defied the king, but the real battle was just beginning. The king might have controlled the trials, but Jake controlled his own fate. And now he was going to fight for both worlds. The final trial had begun, but it was no longer about choosing a princess. It was about choosing whether or not to survive. A bold stand. The palace was in chaos. Jake could feel it, the very air crackling with tension and raw power as the aftermath of his defiance echoed throughout the halls. The king's energy field, once a suffocating, binding force, had collapsed, and now the walls of the royal palace seemed to pulse with a strange, uneasy rhythm. The silence after Jake's declaration of freedom was broken only by the distant rumble of something more ancient and dangerous stirring within the palace. King Seren's fury was palpable. The once imposing ruler now stood at the center of the chamber, his face twisted in an expression of rage that Jake had never seen before. The regal composure, the confidence, the calm authority, all of it shattered in an instant. Now, there was only the desperate, vengeful creature before him. "You dare defy me?" The king's voice, low and seething, echoed through the room. "You are nothing. A mere human caught in the web of my power. You do not know what you've done." Jake's fists clenched, his body still buzzing from the energy he had just released. But now wasn't the time for doubt. He had made his stand, and there was no turning back. The weight of the king's words meant nothing to him, not anymore. "I know exactly what I've done," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with fire. "I've stopped your plan, and I'll keep stopping it. As long as I'm standing, you'll never get away with this." The room seemed to shift around them, the walls groaning as if reacting to the king's unleashed wrath. The princesses stood behind the king, their eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Zara's expression was cold, almost resigned. Lyra's face was a mixture of regret and something else, something like relief. But Arya was staring at him with wide eyes, as though she hadn't expected this turn of events, as though she were seeing Jake for the first time. Jake didn't have time to analyze their reactions. He was aware of the growing storm around them, the ancient power that seemed to be gathering within the palace, something that had been long dormant, now awakening in response to his rebellion. "You think you can stop me?" Seren's voice cracked through the air again, this time laced with something darker. "You cannot. My power is beyond anything you can imagine. You are a mere human, and this world is not yours to command." "Then let me show you just how much of a mere human I am." Jake shot back, stepping forward, his body tense, his heart beating faster. This wasn't just a battle of strength anymore. It was a battle of wills, a battle for control, for the future of both worlds. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the energy around them swelled, pulsating like the heartbeat of a dying star. The king raised his hand, and a surge of power exploded from him, crackling through the air like lightning. But Jake was ready. He didn't back down. With every ounce of his strength, Jake forced the power inside of him to rise. He had learned to tap into the strange energy that flowed through the palace ever since the mind labyrinth, and now he would use it to fight back. The energy collided, Jake's raw, untamed power clashing against the king's overwhelming force. The impact sent shockwaves through the palace, rattling the walls and causing the ground to split beneath their feet. But Jake held his ground, his fists raised, a barrier of light forming around him as he pushed back against the king's fury. "This is where your plan ends, Tyran," Jake yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You've controlled everything for far too long. No more." The king let out a roar, his face twisting with rage. But the more Jake resisted, the weaker the king's energy seemed to grow. It was as if the power sustaining him was draining, unraveling, breaking down piece by piece. "No!" Seren screamed, his form flickering like a mirage. "This cannot be. I am the king of Selner. I am the one who decides." "But not anymore," Jake replied, his eyes blazing with the fire of defiance. He could feel the power inside him reaching its peak, ready to break free, to end the king's reign once and for all. Just as the king was about to launch a final attack, a figure stepped forward from the shadows. Lyra. Her face was set with determination, her eyes filled with both sadness and resolve. "Enough, father," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This ends now." The king faltered, his expression shifting for the first time in what felt like an eternity, first with disbelief, then with a flicker of something else. "Fear. You would betray me, Lyra." "I'm not betraying you, father," Lyra said quietly, stepping closer to Jake, standing beside him. I'm choosing what's right. This plan will destroy everything. Our people, Earth, the galaxy itself. And I won't let that happen." Zara and Arya, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, exchanged glances. Zara's face tightened, but she stepped forward, her expression conflicted. "Lyra speaks the truth, Father. This madness must end." For a moment, there was silence. The king's eyes flickered between his daughters and Jake, his expression one of utter disbelief. But as the realization set in, something within him cracked, his grip on his power faltered. The walls of his control crumbled. "Father, please," Lyra whispered, reaching out to him. "This isn't the way." But Suran, too proud to surrender, let out one last cry, his power surging uncontrollably. It was too much. He had pushed his body beyond its limits. With a final echoing explosion of light, the king's form collapsed, the energy dissipating, leaving only a hollow silence behind. Jake stood frozen, his chest heaving, the weight of the moment sinking in. The king was gone. His reign had ended. The princesses, once bound by fear and duty, now stood free. Zara, Lyra, and Arya looked at each other, their expressions no longer clouded by the king's manipulation. For the first time, there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. They were free to choose their own destinies. And Jake, though exhausted and battered, knew that this was just the beginning of something greater. Together, they had toppled a king. Together, they had saved not just one world, but two. Jake turned to the princesses, his voice soft but firm. "What happens now?" Lyra smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "Now, we rebuild. Together. As equals." And for the first time since he had arrived on Salner, Jake felt that, perhaps, there was hope after all. The future was no longer decided for him. It was his to create. With the king's reign over, the princesses at his side, and Earth's fate in his hands, Jake knew the fight wasn't over. But now, for the first time, it felt like a fight worth winning.